Yeah, so I'm born and raised St. Louis, Missouri. I grew up under a very traditional household, which unfortunately is rare these days. My father was a pastor, very conservative man. My mother stayed at home. It was seven of us. And we grew up on the standard American diet. That's a diet that was very high in processed foods, high in meat products, especially pork, sodas and more margarine, just all the junk food. So I graduated from Roosevelt High School, South City, St. Louis, and I immediately went into the Marines at 18. And then after the Marines, I went to the police department. I always tell a semi-joke and said my father, he was very strong-willed. So pretty much when I was 18, he told me that I had to work 80 hours or get out. So I joined the Marines right in high school. Before I even graduated, I was already enlisted and went right into the Marines, did that for 4 years, a few months after police officer for 7 years. Well, in the Marines, they fed us the garbage from the chow hall. So it's the same stuff, the same junk foods. It was no different than growing up at home. And I was actually a cook. So the foods are terrible. It's processed junk food. They were moving to making it to where you can cook it as fast as possible. The military is where the food industry started experimenting on people with these fake processed foods, the MREs that are packaged. So it's the same garbage. Yeah, so while I was on the police department, I ballooned up to 260 pounds. It was a very stressful job. I never really enjoyed being a police officer, and I knew that God had something more for my life. I just didn't know what it was. And I developed high blood pressure when I was that big. I was eating standard police officer diet, which was a diet where you go to all these fast food restaurants that give you free food, and I was just piling up, and the weight was coming on. When my blood pressure became high, I knew I had to make a change because my father had started to have strokes in 2010. He worked as a mailman for 42 years in addition to being in the ministry. So I knew I had to change. And that was the event. It was my father's decline where I knew that I had to start losing weight. And so I started to, when I was in the Marines, I was a boxer. So I actually went from 160 to 260 from the Marines to the police department. And then I got up to 260, so I started to train again, and I ended up getting all the way back down to around 170 just from training as a boxer. But it wasn't until I read a book by a holistic medical doctor named Fuhrman. I read his book, and that's when I connected diet to what we eat, especially strokes, high blood pressure, and heart disease, the #1 killer of all human beings in the world. And once I found out that information, I developed an extreme passion for health. And over the years, watching my father become decimated by his diet, and once he passed away, that's when the Lord called me to become the minister of wellness. And I left the police department cold turkey in 2015. Once I received my calling to be a minister of wellness, I left the police department, and I haven't looked back since. Don't miss it one bit. I had frequent headaches. I used to carry Tylenol with me, and now I know that you're never supposed to have headaches. That's a sign of the brain detoxing. So I never get headaches now. So that was something that used to ail me quite often now that I look back. I had very bad skin. People compliment my skin now. I've always had bad skin. I thought that was natural. And now I know that was related to diet, especially the dairy. Of course, lactose intolerance. I had bad feet problems from being so heavy. Of course, the high blood pressure, high triglycerides. I had a slightly enlarged heart. I had very, very bad fatigue. Even when I was a boxer in the Marine Corps, I had very bad fatigue. I get tired after one round. Well, that's probably because of the high cholesterol, the high meat diet that I was eating. So I had a myriad of problems that I look back now. I was on that path towards, because the men in my family don't live long. What made the change was reading the book called Eat to Live. A co-worker gave me the book. Got back up. I got all the way down to 165. I got back up to around 195. And a co-worker on the police department said, read this book called Eat to Live by Dr. Joel Fuhrman. It was that book. Because when I opened it up and saw that all these diseases can be reversed with food, then that sealed the deal. And then it went deeper than that. I started learning about ministers who practice nutrition, who from the Bible, that, hey, this is how we're supposed to be eating. We're not supposed to be eating these things. The Bible is a health book in and of itself. So I started getting into information that actually predates any of these holistic doctors here. So it was the Eat to Live book. Without a shadow of a doubt, it was coming across the nutritarian diet style when I saw success stories. And then I applied it to my life because I went to a cardiologist and got a checkup and had problems with my heart. And he thought he had a new patient and I was supposed to see him in 6 weeks. And in those 6 weeks, I went 100% strict and reversed all of my conditions. I believe he was showing me what I was put on this earth to do as far as my purpose in life. Of course, outside of being a husband and being a father, my purpose was the health. Because ever since I always knew that people have always told me with my voice, I have a very unique voice, that you should do voiceovers, you should do radio. But I was never interested in that. But with the health and the nutrition, I found something that I so passionately wanted to speak about, to teach people about, especially within the body of Christ, that we've got it all wrong when it comes to the biblical approach to how we eat. That just because we're New Testament Christians, that doesn't mean that it just abolishes everything prior about how we should be eating and feeding our temples. People are sick, so it's the time is now. It's well received. It's well received. It is. People are so sick, Pastor. They're desperate for change. The time is now. You know that I've heard people say that I'm wasting my time trying to teach health to the church because church folk ain't gonna give up their fried chicken. Well, first of all, I've spoken to all sorts of different backgrounds, and this is an epidemic across the board, but I do believe that the time is ripe for a change. Whenever I speak at churches and they are open and receptive to this information. So it's a blessing to be able to serve the body of Christ in this area. All people, but definitely especially the body of Christ, because I consider it as a memorial to my father, Pastor Eddie Jordan Jr., that I'm able to save so many people from the weapon of mass destruction that he was unable to overcome.
Hello, I'm Pastor Keith Clinton. I have been compelled to produce a new show titled Living Testimonies. Do you have an awesome testimony that you need to share with the world? Well, then email me at keithclinton1@gmail.com